The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland, Oregon, but Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell barely noticed the light. She sat alone in Conference Room 3B, surrounded by towers of case files, crime scene photographs, and medical reports that painted a devastating picture. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, untouched, as she stared at a single photograph pinned to her bulletin board, a smiling 3-year-old girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. Emma Rodriguez, the only witness to a crime that had shattered multiple lives. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes, fighting the exhaustion that came from 3 months of sleepless nights. This case had consumed her in ways few others had during her 12-year career as a prosecutor. On her laptop screen, security footage from Little Sunshine Daycare played on a loop, grainy, corrupted images that showed movement but revealed nothing concrete. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., October 15th, the moment everything changed. "Talk to me, Emma," Sarah whispered to the photograph, knowing the futility of her plea. "Tell me what you saw." The facts of the case were brutal in their simplicity. Sarah Chen, a beloved 28-year-old preschool teacher, had been found unconscious in the daycare's supply room, her skull fractured, blood pooling beneath her head. The children had been napping in the adjacent room, all except one, little Emma Rodriguez, who had wandered into the hallway looking for her favorite stuffed rabbit. What she witnessed in those terrible moments remained locked behind a wall of traumatized silence. Marcus Webb, the daycare's 42-year-old maintenance worker, had been arrested fleeing the scene with scratches on his arms and Sarah Chen's blood on his work boots. He claimed innocence, insisting he'd discovered the teacher and panicked. His attorney, the notorious Richard Castellano, had built a career on creating reasonable doubt from thin air, and he was doing it again. The physical evidence was circumstantial at best. The blood on Webb's boots could be explained by his discovery story, the scratches on his arms. He claimed they came from fixing the playground fence earlier that day. Witnesses placed him near the supply room, but no one actually saw the attack. The weapon, a heavy wrench, had been wiped clean. Without Emma's testimony, without someone who could say definitively, "I saw him do it," the case was crumbling like sand through Sarah's fingers. The conference room door opened and Detective Mike Torres entered, his expression grim. "Judge Coleman just called," he said, dropping into a chair across from Sarah. "Defense filed another motion to dismiss. Hearing scheduled for Friday. 4 days, Sarah. That's all we've got." Sarah's stomach dropped. On what grounds? Insufficient evidence to proceed. Castellano's arguing that without a competent witness, we're wasting the court's time. Mike leaned forward, his voice heavy with frustration. "And the hell of it is, he's not entirely wrong. We've got circumstantial evidence and a witness who hasn't spoken in 6 months. What judge wouldn't have doubts?" "Emma is competent," Sarah insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "She's traumatized, not incompetent. There's a difference." "Try explaining that to a jury," Mike countered. 5 psychologists have evaluated her. 5 reports all saying the same thing: severe traumatic mutism, no timeline for recovery. Forcing her to testify could cause irreparable psychological damage. Castellano will tear us apart if we put that little girl on the stand. Sarah stood abruptly, packing to the window. Below, Portland bustled with morning traffic, people rushing to work, living their normal lives. Somewhere in this city, Sarah Chen lay in a rehabilitation facility, learning to walk and talk again after 3 brain surgeries. Her doctors said she'd never fully recover. Her teaching career was over. Her attacker might walk free. "What about the parents?" Sarah asked. "Maria and Carlos, how are they holding up?" Mike's expression darkened. "Not well. Maria called me last night crying. Said Emma just sits in her room staring at walls, clutching that teddy bear. Won't eat unless they practically force her. Won't play with her little brother. It's like the light went out inside her." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Carlos asked me point blank, is my daughter going to be like this forever?" What the hell was I supposed to say? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility. She'd prosecuted murderers, rapists, monsters of every variety. But this case was different. This time, justice depended on a traumatized child finding her voice, and every expert said that voice might be gone forever. "We're missing something," she said suddenly, turning back to face Mike. "There has to be another way, some piece of evidence we haven't found, some witness we haven't interviewed, something." "We've turned over every stone, Sarah, multiple times. This is it." Mike stood, gathering his jacket. "I've got to brief the chief. He's asking whether we should offer Webb a plea deal. Maybe voluntary manslaughter, 8 to 10 years instead of 25 for aggravated assault." "No," Sarah's voice was steel. "Marcus Webb doesn't get to negotiate. He beat a defenseless woman nearly to death while a child watched. He traumatized Emma so severely she can't speak. He doesn't deserve a deal." "Then we need a miracle," Mike said quietly, "and we need it by Friday." After he left, Sarah sank back into her chair, staring at Emma's photograph. The little girl's smile seemed to mock her now, a reminder of innocence lost, of childhood stolen by violence. Somewhere in that 3-year-old mind lived the truth that could convict Marcus Webb. But how could they reach it without destroying what remained of Emma's fragile psyche? Sarah's phone buzzed with an email notification. Another message from Castellano, probably another smugly confident filing. She ignored it, instead opening her bottom desk drawer where she kept a worn photograph of her own daughter, Lily, now safely away at college. She'd become a prosecutor to protect children like Lily, like Emma. But right now, she had no idea how to save either the case or the little girl at its center. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Portland. Sarah watched them roll in, dark and ominous, feeling like they mirrored the impossible situation she faced. 4 days until the dismissal hearing. 4 days to find a miracle. She had no idea that Miracle was about to walk into her life on 4 legs, with golden fur and the wisdom of countless trauma victims in his gentle brown eyes. But that revelation was still hours away, and right now, Sarah Mitchell felt more helpless than she'd ever felt in her entire career. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly forward. Time was running out. 6 months earlier, Emma Rodriguez had been a whirlwind of energy and sound. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, used to joke that their daughter had 2 volumes, loud and louder. She sang made-up songs about her favorite things, butterflies, strawberry ice cream, her little brother Miguel's funny faces. She narrated her entire life as if performing for an invisible audience, providing running commentary on everything from breakfast cereal to cloud shapes. "Mama, look, that cloud looks like a bunny with really, really long ears." The house had been filled with her laughter, her questions, her irrepressible joy. Now the Rodriguez home was silent as a tomb. Maria stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom, watching her daughter sit motionless on the floor, surrounded by toys she no longer touched. The little girl stared at the wall with vacant eyes, clutching Mr. Patches, her worn brown teddy bear, against her chest. It was 10:30 in the morning, and Emma had been in that exact position since waking at 7. She hadn't asked for breakfast, hadn't asked for anything. She simply existed in some unreachable place where her mother's love couldn't penetrate. "Mija, please," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "Please come back to me." Emma didn't respond, didn't even blink. It was as if the child had physically left her body, leaving only an empty shell behind. Carlos appeared behind his wife, wrapping his arms around her trembling shoulders. His eyes were red-rimmed from another sleepless night. "Any change?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's like she's gone, Carlos. Our baby is right there, but she's gone." They had been through this conversation 100 times, but the pain never dulled. If anything, it sharpened with each passing day, cutting deeper into their hearts. Carlos had taken a leave of absence from his job as an electrician. Maria had quit her position at the library entirely. Their world had shrunk to the dimensions of this house, this bedroom, this unreachable child. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the third child psychologist they'd consulted, had explained it clinically. Traumatic mutism. Emma witnessed something so terrifying that her mind has essentially shut down all verbal communication as a protective mechanism. Think of it as a circuit breaker that's tripped. Until she feels safe enough, until her brain processes the trauma, that circuit won't reset. "How long?" Carlos had demanded. "How long until our daughter speaks again?" Dr. Foster had hesitated, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine sympathy. "There's no timeline with childhood trauma. Some children recover in weeks, others take years. Some," she trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like poison gas, "some never fully recover." That appointment had been 2 weeks ago. Since then, Emma had only gotten worse. The night terrors had started on the third day after the incident. Emma would wake screaming, except she couldn't scream because she couldn't make sounds. Instead, she'd sit bolt upright in bed, mouth open in a silent shriek, tears pouring down her face, her small body convulsing with terror. Maria would rush in, gather her daughter in her arms, rock her and whisper soothing words that Emma seemed not to hear. The episodes could last 15 minutes or more, ending only when Emma collapsed from exhaustion. "She's reliving it," Dr. Foster had explained. "Every night her subconscious is forcing her to confront what she saw. It's her mind's attempt to process the trauma, but without the ability to verbalize it, express it, talk about it, she's trapped in an endless loop." Carlos had punched a wall after that session, leaving a hole in the drywall that remained as a testament to his helpless rage. Now 3-year-old Miguel toddled into Emma's room, clutching his own stuffed animal, a bright blue elephant. At 18 months old, he didn't fully understand why his sister no longer played with him, but he sensed something was wrong. "Emma," he said hopefully, offering her his elephant. "Play." Emma didn't move, didn't acknowledge his existence. Miguel's face crumpled, and he began to cry. Maria quickly scooped him up, carrying him out of the room before his wails could further upset Emma, though it was hard to know what upset her anymore. The child who once laughed at everything now showed no emotion at all. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for next week. Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell had called yesterday, her voice tight with stress. "I need to prepare you," she'd said. "The defense attorney is going to argue that Emma is incompetent to testify. And honestly, Maria, Carlos, I don't know if we can put her through it. Even if the judge allows it, the trauma of testifying, of being in the same room as the man who hurt Miss Sarah, who hurt Emma psychologically." She'd paused. "It could destroy what's left of her childhood." "So he just gets away with it," Carlos had shouted into the phone. "That monster walks free while our daughter is trapped in her own mind." "I'm doing everything I can," Sarah had promised, "but I won't sacrifice Emma to win this case. I won't." The phone call had ended with no resolution, no hope, no light at the end of the tunnel. Now Maria sat on the floor beside her daughter, not touching her. Emma had started flinching from physical contact unless she initiated it, but close enough to offer presence if not comfort. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "Mama's right here. You're safe now. That bad day is over. You're safe." Emma's fingers tightened around Mr. Patches, her only response. The doorbell rang downstairs. Carlos went to answer it, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Maria heard voices, Carlos and someone else, male, unfamiliar. A moment later, her husband appeared in the doorway with a tall man in a police uniform. Detective Warren, Maria remembered from the initial interviews. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the detective said gently, "I know this is a difficult time, but I'd like to talk to you and your husband about a possible way to help Emma. I have someone I'd like her to meet." "Another therapist?" Maria asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Another expert who will tell us there's no timeline for recovery?" "Not exactly," Detective Warren said, and for the first time in months, Maria saw something in an adult's eyes that had been absent for far too long: hope. "I have a partner who specializes in cases like Emma's. His name is Ranger, and I think he might be able to reach your daughter in ways we humans can't." Maria blinked, confused. Ranger, I don't understand. He's a dog, Mrs. Rodriguez, a golden retriever, and I've seen him work miracles with traumatized children. The detective glanced at Emma, still motionless on the floor. I know it sounds unconventional, but what do you have to lose? Let Ranger meet Emma, just once. If it doesn't help, I'll leave and never bother you again. Carlos and Maria exchanged glances. They'd tried everything else: medications, therapy, play therapy, art therapy, even acupuncture at one desperate point. Nothing had worked. Their daughter was slipping further away with each passing day, disappearing into a silence that felt increasingly permanent. When? Carlos asked, his voice rough with cautious hope. I have him in my vehicle right now, Detective Warren said. If you're willing, we could try today. Maria looked at her daughter, her beautiful, broken little girl who had forgotten how to smile, how to speak, how to be a child. What did they have to lose indeed? They'd already lost everything that mattered. Okay, she whispered. Bring him in. Detective James Warren had been a cop for 23 years, but he'd been Ranger's partner for only 5. In that time, the golden retriever had taught him more about human nature, compassion, and healing than 2 decades of police work ever had. As he sat in his unmarked vehicle outside the Rodriguez home, Warren scratched behind Ranger's ears and took a deep breath, hoping he wasn't about to make a terrible mistake. You ready for this, boy? He asked softly. Ranger's tail thumped against the seat, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on Warren's face. The dog always seemed to know when they were about to do something important. It was as if he could sense the weight of the moment, the fragility of hope hanging in the balance. Warren had first met Ranger at the Oregon Humane Society 5 years ago. He'd been searching for a narcotics detection dog, and the shelter director had walked him past a dozen energetic German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois, typical police dog breeds. But something had stopped Warren in his tracks. In the last kennel sat a 2-year-old golden retriever, calm and observant, watching the chaos around him with an almost zen-like serenity. That one's not for police work, the director had said dismissively. Too gentle, too sensitive, he'd never make it through protection training. But Warren had knelt beside the kennel and Ranger had approached slowly, pressing his nose against the chain link. When their eyes met, Warren had felt something shift in his chest, a recognition, a connection he couldn't explain. Tell me about him, he'd said. The director had shrugged. Owner surrendered him after a divorce, said he was a great dog but they couldn't keep him. He's good with kids, great temperament, but he's not what you're looking for. Warren had adopted Ranger that day anyway, some instinct telling him this dog was meant for something different, something more. And he'd been right. Ranger had excelled at narcotics detection training, his nose as sharp as any dog's Warren had worked with. But it was during a routine school visit that Warren had discovered Ranger's true calling. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, had approached them during the demonstration. She'd been clutching a teacher's hand, clearly terrified. Warren had learned later that she'd been attacked by a neighbor's pit bull and had been phobic of dogs ever since. But something about Ranger was different. The golden retriever had simply sat down, made himself small and non-threatening, and waited. No movement, no excited energy, just patience. After 10 minutes, the little girl had reached out a trembling hand. Ranger had remained perfectly still, letting her touch his head at her own pace. By the end of the visit, she'd been hugging him, tears streaming down her face, whispering "good dog" over and over. That had been the beginning. Warren had gotten Ranger certified as a therapy dog, then pursued specialized training for trauma work. Over the next 4 years, they'd worked with dozens of children, abuse victims, witnesses to violence, kids who'd lost parents to tragedy. Ranger seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense what each child needed. Some needed playfulness, and he'd romp and roll. Others needed quiet companionship, and he'd simply lie beside them, a warm presence asking for nothing in return. The successes had been remarkable. A 6-year-old boy who'd witnessed his father's murder and hadn't slept in weeks finally dozed off with his head on Ranger's side. A teenage girl who'd been sexually assaulted and had stopped eating began feeding Ranger treats, then eventually started eating herself. A 4-year-old who'd been locked in a closet for days by an abusive parent slowly emerged from his shell, using Ranger as a bridge back to trusting humans. But Warren knew Emma's case was different, more severe. The child hadn't just stopped talking, she'd retreated so far into herself that even the best therapists couldn't reach her. What made him think a dog could succeed where trained professionals had failed? Yet something in his gut told him to try. Maybe it was the desperation in Prosecutor Mitchell's voice when she'd called him. Maybe it was the haunted look in the crime scene photos of that daycare supply room. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just couldn't stand the thought of letting that little girl suffer without at least attempting to help. "Listen, Ranger," Warren said, turning to face his partner fully. "This one's important, more important than most. That little girl in there, she saw something terrible, something that broke her, and if we can't help her find her voice, a very bad man might go free." Ranger tilted his head, listening intently the way he always did when Warren spoke to him seriously. "But here's the thing, we're not doing this for the case. We're not doing it for the prosecutor or the justice system or any of that. We're doing it for Emma, just Emma. If she never testifies, if she never says a word about what she saw, that's okay. Our job is to help her heal, period. You understand?" Ranger's tail wagged slowly, and he pressed his nose against Warren's cheek, a gesture of affection and understanding. Warren clipped Ranger's official K9 vest on, though he'd removed most of the intimidating patches and badges. This vest was simpler, gentler, with just a small therapy dog certification badge. He wanted Emma to see Ranger as a friend, not as something scary or official. As they walked up the pathway to the Rodriguez home, Warren felt his pulse quicken. He'd made this walk dozens of times to dozens of houses, but the nervousness never fully disappeared. What if Ranger couldn't reach this child? What if Emma was too far gone? What if bringing a dog into her traumatized world only made things worse? Carlos Rodriguez opened the door before Warren could knock, his face etched with exhaustion and desperate hope. "Detective Warren," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming. I don't know if this will work, but we're willing to try anything." "No promises," Warren said honestly. "Every child is different. Ranger's helped a lot of kids, but there are no guarantees. All I can tell you is that he'll do his best, and so will I." Carlos nodded, stepping aside. "Maria's upstairs with Emma. She hasn't moved all morning, just sits there staring at nothing." Warren took a deep breath and led Ranger inside. The house was clean but had the feel of a place where joy had died. Photos on the walls that no one looked at anymore. Children's artwork that seemed like relics from another life. Through the doorway, he could see toys scattered across a living room floor, untouched and gathering dust. At the base of the stairs, Warren paused. This was it. The moment that would determine whether Emma Rodriguez had a chance at healing or would remain trapped in her silent prison. "Okay, boy," he whispered to Ranger. "Let's go meet Emma. Remember her pace, not ours. She's in control. We're just here to offer love and patience." Ranger looked up at him, those warm brown eyes full of ancient wisdom that Warren had learned to trust completely. Then, side by side, they climbed the stairs toward a little girl who'd forgotten how to speak, hoping that perhaps, just perhaps, the language of unconditional love might transcend words. Maria Rodriguez heard the footsteps on the stairs and felt her heart clench with anxiety. She'd agreed to this meeting, but now, watching Emma's blank face as the child sat motionless on her bedroom floor, Maria wondered if she'd made a mistake. Another stranger, another attempt, another potential failure that would chip away at the tiny fragments of hope she had left. Detective Warren appeared in the doorway, and beside him stood the most beautiful golden retriever Maria had ever seen. The dog's coat gleamed like spun gold in the afternoon light streaming through Emma's window. His tail swayed gently, not the excited thrashing of an overeager pet, but a calm, measured rhythm that somehow conveyed both friendliness and respect. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Warren said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is Ranger. We're going to come in very slowly. I need you to stay calm and trust the process. Whatever happens or doesn't happen, it's okay. There's no timeline here." Maria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, making space, making herself invisible so she wouldn't interfere with whatever was about to unfold. Emma didn't react to their entrance. She remained in her spot near the toy box, Mr. Patches clutched against her chest, her eyes fixed on some point on the wall that only she could see. Her small body was rigid, every muscle tensed as if prepared to flee or fight, though she never did either. She simply existed. Warren guided Ranger to the center of the room, about 10 feet from where Emma sat. Then, with a barely perceptible hand signal, he had the dog lie down completely flat on the carpet, head resting on his paws. Ranger's eyes stayed open, watchful but not staring directly at Emma. Instead, he looked slightly to the side, a non-threatening posture that Warren had learned was crucial with traumatized children. "I'm going to sit down too," Warren explained softly to Maria. "We're going to make ourselves as small and non-threatening as possible. The goal is to let Emma observe us without feeling pressured or afraid." He lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged beside Ranger but not touching the dog. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of Carlos packing downstairs and the faint hum of traffic outside. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Emma didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge that anything in her environment had changed. Maria felt tears pricking her eyes. This wasn't working. Nothing was working. Her daughter was lost and... Then Ranger sighed. It was such a simple sound, so utterly mundane, just a dog exhaling, settling into comfort on a soft carpet. But something about it caused the tiniest flicker in Emma's eyes. Not much. Just a microscopic shift, a brief break in the 1,000-yard stare that had become her default expression. Warren noticed it too. Maria saw his body relax slightly, saw the ghost of a smile cross his weathered face. He was an experienced enough handler to know that even the smallest reaction was significant. Another 10 minutes crawled by. Maria's legs began to ache from standing so still, but she didn't dare move. The room had taken on an almost sacred quality, as if they were all participating in some ancient ritual that required absolute patience and faith. Ranger shifted position slightly, rolling partway onto his side. His tail gave a gentle thump against the carpet. His eyes closed halfway, projecting absolute contentment and safety. Emma's head turned, just a fraction of an inch, but it turned. Maria's breath caught. Carlos, who had crept up the stairs and was now standing in the hallway, pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from making a sound. For the first time in 6 months, Emma was voluntarily looking at something in her environment. Her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that used to sparkle with mischief and joy, were fixed on Ranger. There was no emotion in her gaze, no curiosity or fear or interest, just observation. But it was something. It was more than they'd had yesterday. Warren remained perfectly still, not even turning his head to look at Emma. He understood instinctively that any sudden movement, any sign of excitement or pressure, could shatter this fragile moment. 20 minutes became 30, 30 became 45. And then, so slowly that at first Maria thought she was imagining it, Emma began to move. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't stand up or crawl forward. She simply shifted her weight, repositioning herself so that she was facing more directly toward Ranger instead of the wall. Mr. Patches remained locked against her chest, but her grip had loosened slightly. Ranger's tail thumped again, a gentle acknowledgement that seemed to say, "I see you, and that's wonderful, but there's no rush." Emma took her first real breath in what felt like hours. Not the shallow, mechanical breathing of someone merely surviving, but a deeper inhale that suggested some tiny part of her was beginning to re-engage with the world around her. "Good," Warren murmured, so quietly Maria almost didn't hear him. "Very good, Emma. Ranger's happy to meet you. He's a very patient boy and he likes sitting in rooms with nice people. No pressure, we're just here." Another 15 minutes passed. The afternoon light shifted, casting longer shadows across the bedroom. Downstairs, Miguel called out for his father, but Carlos quickly shushed him, not wanting any disruption. Then Emma moved again. This time she pulled one leg out from under herself, extending it slightly toward Ranger. It was such a small gesture, but to Maria, it felt like watching her daughter take her first steps all over again. Emma was reaching out, not with her hands yet, but with her body, testing the waters, seeing if it was safe to venture closer to this calm, golden presence in her room. Ranger opened his eyes fully and looked directly at Emma for the first time. His gaze was gentle, almost tender, as if he understood the monumental courage it took for this broken child to move even an inch toward connection. Warren took a calculated risk. Moving very slowly, he reached out and scratched behind Ranger's ear. "He loves this," Warren said conversationally, his tone casual and non-demanding. "Right behind his ears, that's his favorite spot. Makes him go all sleepy and happy." Emma watched the interaction, her eyes tracking Warren's hand movements. For just a moment, so brief Maria almost missed it, Emma's fingers twitched, mimicking the petting motion. An hour had passed since they'd entered the room. An hour of patience, of silence, of allowing Emma to process at her own pace. And while she hadn't spoken, while she hadn't smiled or shown any emotion, she had responded. She had engaged, however minimally, with the world outside her traumatized mind. Warren caught Maria's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. The message was clear: this is progress. This is hope. This is the beginning. "Emma," Warren said softly, "Ranger and I are going to leave now, but we'd like to come back tomorrow if that's okay with you. Same time, same place. We'll just sit and keep you company. Would that be all right?" Emma didn't answer, of course. But as Warren stood slowly, as Ranger rose to his feet with that same gentle, unhurried grace, Emma's eyes followed them. Not the wall anymore. Not the void. But the dog, the golden retriever who had simply existed beside her without demanding anything, without pushing, without needing her to be anything other than what she was. As they reached the doorway, Ranger paused. He looked back at Emma one more time, his tail wagging softly, and gave a gentle woof, not loud or alarming, just a friendly goodbye. And there in Emma's eyes Maria saw it, the faintest spark of recognition. Not a smile, not yet, but something. A tiny light in the darkness, fragile as a candle flame in a storm, but burning nonetheless. After Warren and Ranger left, after Carlos had escorted them out with whispered thanks and desperate questions about what happened next, Maria sat down beside her daughter. Emma had returned to her original position, staring at the wall, clutching Mr. Patches. But now Maria noticed something different. Emma wasn't staring at nothing anymore. She was staring at the exact spot where Ranger had been lying, as if she could still see his outline imprinted on the carpet. "He'll come back tomorrow, Mija," Maria whispered, allowing herself to feel the first genuine hope she'd experienced in half a year. "The nice dog will come back tomorrow." Emma didn't respond, but she didn't need to. For the first time since that terrible day at Little Sunshine Daycare, Emma Rodriguez had connected, however briefly, with another living being. It was a beginning, and sometimes, Maria thought, tears streaming down her face, beginnings are everything. Detective Warren returned the next afternoon at exactly 2:00 p.m. as promised. Maria had spent the morning watching Emma, searching for any sign that yesterday's breakthrough had lasting effects. The child had eaten a few bites of breakfast without being coerced, a small miracle in itself, and had spent the morning in her usual spot. But twice, Maria had caught her looking toward the bedroom door as if waiting for something. When the doorbell rang, Emma's head turned sharply toward the sound. Her fingers tightened around Mr. Patches, but there was alertness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She knew who was coming. Warren entered the bedroom with Ranger, and this time the dog's tail wagged with slightly more enthusiasm, as if he too remembered their previous meeting. Following the same protocol, they took their positions on the floor, Ranger lying flat, Warren sitting quietly beside him. But today was different. Today, Emma was already looking at them when they arrived. "Hello again, Emma," Warren said softly. "Ranger was very happy when I told him we were coming to visit you today. I think he likes your room. It's peaceful here." The first 30 minutes passed much like the day before, quiet observation, patient waiting. But then something remarkable happened. Emma scooted forward. Not much, maybe 6 inches, but it brought her noticeably closer to Ranger. The dog's ears perked up, acknowledging the movement, but he remained still, allowing Emma to control the pace of their interaction. By the end of that second visit, Emma had moved within 4 feet of Ranger. She hadn't touched him, hadn't spoken, but she'd voluntarily reduced the physical distance between them. Warren left with cautious optimism, scheduling another visit for the following day. Day 3 brought rain, heavy drops pelting Emma's window. When Warren and Ranger arrived, the dog's coat was slightly damp despite the toweling Warren had given him in the car. Emma noticed immediately, her eyes fixing on the water droplets clinging to Ranger's golden fur. Ranger shook himself once, sending a small spray of water across the carpet, and Emma's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. A response. A recognition that something mildly amusing had occurred. "Ranger loves the rain," Warren said conversationally, his tone warm and unhurried. "But he's not a fan of baths. Strange, isn't it? He'll play in muddy puddles all day, but the moment I bring out the shampoo, he gives me this look like I've betrayed him." Emma watched as Warren gently dried Ranger's ears with a small towel. Her fingers mimicked the motion again, that unconscious mirror movement that suggested some part of her wanted to participate, wanted to help, wanted to connect. On day 4, Emma was waiting by her bedroom door when they arrived. Still clutching Mr. Patches, still silent, but positioned closer to the entrance as if she'd been anticipating their visit. When Ranger entered and took his usual spot on the floor, Emma sat down just 3 feet away from him. Warren pulled out a small bag of dog treats from his pocket. "Would you like to give Ranger a treat, Emma? He knows a trick. Watch this." He held up a treat and said, "Ranger, shake." The golden retriever lifted his paw in a perfect handshake motion, his tail wagging gently. Warren gave him the treat and praised him. Then, moving very slowly, Warren extended the treat bag toward Emma. The room fell silent. Maria, watching from the hallway, held her breath. Carlos stood frozen on the stairs, barely daring to hope. Emma stared at the bag for a long moment. Then, with movements so slow they seemed to occur in a different time stream, she reached out and took a single treat from the bag. Her hand trembled as she held it, uncertain what to do next. "You can just hold it out," Warren encouraged gently. "Ranger will take it very carefully. He's good with little hands." Emma extended her arm, the treat balanced on her palm. Ranger leaned forward, his movements deliberate and gentle, and took the treat with the softest mouth imaginable. His whiskers brushed Emma's palm, and for the first time in 6 months, Emma Rodriguez smiled. It was fleeting, lasting perhaps 2 seconds before her face returned to its neutral mask. But it had been real. Maria saw it. Carlos saw it. Warren saw it. And most importantly, somewhere inside her traumatized mind, Emma had felt it, that tiny spark of joy that had been buried under layers of fear and pain. Day 5 brought a breakthrough. Emma fed Ranger 3 treats, then tentatively reached out and touched his head. Just her fingertips at first, barely making contact as if she expected him to disappear like smoke. But Ranger remained solid, warm, real. Emma's hand traveled down to his ear, feeling the soft fur there, and suddenly she collapsed forward, burying her face in Ranger's neck. The dog didn't move except to adjust his position slightly, making it easier for Emma to hold him. Warren blinked back tears, understanding the significance of this moment. Emma was seeking comfort, reaching out for physical connection after months of isolation. She was choosing to be vulnerable, to trust, to feel. They stayed like that for 20 minutes, Emma clinging to Ranger while the dog patiently accepted her embrace. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were wet with tears, the first tears she'd shed since the incident. All her grief had been locked inside, but Ranger had somehow found the key. By day 7, Emma was sitting beside Ranger, her head resting against his side while Warren read children's books aloud. She didn't interact with the stories, didn't point at pictures or laugh at funny parts, but she was present. She was there. Day 9 brought another milestone. Carlos and Maria were in the room when Emma suddenly stood up, walked to her toy box, and pulled out a bright red ball. She returned to Ranger and placed it in front of him, then looked at Warren expectantly. "You want to play?" Warren asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You want to play fetch with Ranger?" Emma didn't answer with words, but she nodded. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but it was communication. Deliberate, intentional communication. Warren took the ball outside to the backyard, Emma following. The first time she'd voluntarily left her room in months. Ranger bounded after the ball, bringing it back again and again while Emma watched. And then, on the 5th throw, Emma laughed. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, as if her vocal cords had forgotten how to produce joy. But it was laughter, genuine and pure, ringing through the Rodriguez backyard like church bells announcing a miracle. Maria collapsed to her knees in the grass, sobbing with relief. Carlos wrapped his arms around his wife, tears streaming down his face. Their daughter was laughing. Their Emma was coming back. By day 12, Emma would whisper to Ranger, words too quiet for anyone else to hear, secrets shared between a traumatized child and her guardian angel. Warren didn't try to eavesdrop, understanding that these private communications were part of Emma's healing process. On day 14, Dr. Rebecca Foster came to observe a session. She watched in amazement as Emma played gently with Ranger, even giggling when the dog rolled onto his back for belly rubs. After the session, Foster pulled Warren aside. "In 20 years of child psychology, I've never seen anything like this," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "Emma's transformation it's unprecedented. Whatever Ranger is doing, whatever connection they've formed, it's reaching parts of her psyche that traditional therapy couldn't touch." That evening, as Warren prepared to leave, Emma did something that made everyone in the room freeze. She tugged on Warren's sleeve and, in a voice barely above a whisper, spoke her first words to a human being in 6 months. "Come back." Warren knelt down to her level, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, Emma, I promise. Ranger and I will come back, every day for as long as you need us." Emma nodded solemnly, then returned to Ranger, wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight hug before whispering something into his fur that sounded like "thank you." Later that night, prosecutor Sarah Mitchell received a call from Detective Warren. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with cautious hope, "I think Emma might be ready. Not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. She's finding her voice again. And when she's ready, when she feels safe enough, I think she'll be able to tell us what she saw." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling relief wash over her for the first time in months. "You did it," she whispered. "You and Ranger actually did it." "Ranger did it," Warren corrected gently. "I just drove the car. That dog, he's special, Sarah. He sees into broken souls and reminds them how to heal." As Emma fell asleep that night, for the first time since the incident, she didn't have nightmares. Instead, she dreamed of a golden dog with kind eyes, running through fields of sunshine, and in her dream she was running beside him, laughing and free and whole once more. 3 weeks after Ranger entered Emma's life, prosecutor Sarah Mitchell made a phone call that would change the trajectory of the case and legal precedent in Oregon. She dialed Richard Castellano, the defense attorney, knowing the conversation would be explosive. "Richard, I'm notifying you that we intend to have Emma Rodriguez testify at trial, accompanied by a certified therapy dog." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. Then Castellano erupted. "You're joking. Tell me you're joking, Sarah. A dog. In my courtroom. This is a murder trial, not a petting zoo." His voice rose with each word. "I will fight this with every resource at my disposal. This is prejudicial, it's absurd, It's legal," Sarah interrupted calmly, though her heart was racing. "Facility dogs have been used in courtrooms across the country. There's precedent in California, Washington, even Idaho. Emma can't testify without Ranger. The trauma is too severe." "Then she doesn't testify," Castellano shot back. "You don't get to parade a golden retriever in front of my jury to generate sympathy for your witness. The emotional manipulation is off the charts. Judge Coleman will never allow this." "We'll see," Sarah said quietly. "Motion hearing is scheduled for Friday. Prepare your arguments." She hung up, her hands shaking. This was a tremendous gamble. If Judge Coleman denied the motion, Emma might never testify. If she allowed it but the jury viewed it as manipulative, the entire case could backfire. But Sarah had visited the Rodriguez home twice now, had watched Emma's transformation with Ranger, and she knew in her bones this was the only way. The motion hearing arrived like a storm front. The courtroom gallery was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocacy groups on both sides. Animal-assisted therapy organizations sent representatives. Defense attorneys from across the state showed up to watch what they saw as a dangerous precedent. The air crackled with tension. Judge Patricia Coleman, a 62-year-old jurist known for her thoughtful deliberations and no-nonsense courtroom management, entered with an expression that revealed nothing. She'd spent the previous 3 days reviewing case law, consulting with judicial colleagues, and wrestling with the implications of her decision. "Counselors," she began, settling into her chair, "this is an unusual motion but not without precedent. Ms. Mitchell, you may proceed." Sarah stood, her prepared remarks organized but her delivery from the heart. "Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez is 3 years old. She witnessed a brutal assault that left her teacher in a coma for 2 weeks. The trauma was so severe that Emma stopped speaking entirely for 6 months. Traditional therapy failed. Medication failed. She was trapped in what psychologists call traumatic mutism, a prison of silence built by her own mind to protect itself from unbearable memories." She clicked to a presentation slide showing Emma before the incident, bright-eyed, smiling, full of life. Then a photo taken 2 months after, hollow-eyed, vacant, clutching a teddy bear. Then Detective Warren introduced Emma to Ranger, a certified therapy dog with documented success in trauma cases. The transformation has been remarkable. More slides, Emma petting Ranger, Emma laughing in the backyard, Emma whispering to the dog. "She's speaking again, Your Honor. Not fluently, not consistently, but she's finding her voice. Dr. Rebecca Foster, Emma's psychologist, will testify that without Ranger's presence, Emma will likely regress." The courtroom environment, the formality, the strangers, the presence of the defendant, will trigger her trauma response. She'll shut down completely. Castellano was on his feet before Sarah finished. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation of the worst kind. The defense isn't objecting to therapy dogs in general. We understand they serve a purpose in therapeutic settings. But this is a courtroom. The jury will see a terrified child clinging to a cute dog and immediately assume my client is guilty. How can we possibly get a fair trial when the prosecution is literally bringing puppy dog eyes into evidence?" Several reporters in the gallery stifled laughs, but Judge Coleman's expression remained stern. "Continue, Mr. Castellano." "Furthermore," the defense attorney said, gaining momentum, "the dog's presence inherently suggests that the witness needs extraordinary protection from my client. It's prejudicial by its very nature. The jury will think, If this child needs a therapy dog just to be in the same room as the defendant, he must be a monster. That's not evidence, Your Honor. That's theater. Sarah responded immediately. The dog isn't evidence of guilt. The dog is a medical accommodation, no different than allowing a witness to testify via closed-circuit television or behind a screen. Courts have long recognized that we must balance the defendant's right to confrontation with the witness's psychological well-being, especially child witnesses. Emma has a constitutional right to be heard, and Ranger makes that possible. Judge Coleman leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, what safeguards are you proposing to minimize prejudice? The dog will wear a plain vest with no police markings. Detective Warren will introduce Ranger to the jury beforehand, explaining his role as a medical accommodation. We'll instruct jurors explicitly that the dog's presence implies nothing about the defendant's guilt or innocence, only about Emma's medical needs. The dog will lie quietly beside Emma, visible to her but not prominently displayed to the jury. The hearing continued for 2 hours. Dr. Rebecca Foster testified about Emma's fragile psychological state, explaining how Ranger had become her security tether to reality. An expert in animal-assisted therapy explained the science behind why dogs help trauma victims feel safe. A law professor discussed the constitutional balancing act between confrontation rights and access to justice. Castellano brought his own expert, a psychologist who argued that Emma was too young to provide reliable testimony regardless of the dog, that her memories might be contaminated, that the whole proceeding was traumatizing her further. He presented case law from states that had rejected facility dogs, arguing they unfairly prejudiced defendants. Finally, Judge Coleman called a recess. I need to consider this carefully, she said. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for my decision. That hour felt like a lifetime. Sarah sat in the hallway, her stomach churning. Detective Warren stood nearby with Ranger, who seemed to sense the tension and remained unusually still. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez sat on a bench, holding hands, praying silently. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Coleman's face was still unreadable. She waited for complete silence before speaking. This court recognizes that we are in uncharted territory, she began. The law must evolve to meet the needs of justice while protecting the rights of all parties. I've reviewed the precedents, considered the expert testimony, and weighed the competing interests. Sarah's fingernails dug into her palms. The motion is granted. The courtroom erupted. Castellano shot to his feet, objecting. Advocacy groups in the gallery applauded until Judge Coleman's gavel restored order. However, the judge continued, raising her voice, there will be strict conditions. The dog will be introduced to the jury with explicit instructions about his role. Any attorney who attempts to reference the dog in a prejudicial manner will face sanctions. The jury will be instructed repeatedly that Ranger's presence is a medical accommodation that implies nothing about the defendant's guilt. She fixed both attorneys with a stern look. We're going to get this right. This child deserves to be heard and Mr. Webb deserves a fair trial. Those interests are not mutually exclusive and this court will ensure both are protected. Trial begins Monday. Prepare accordingly. As they left the courtroom, Detective Warren knelt beside Emma, who had been waiting with a victim advocate in a private room. Emma, he said gently, the judge said Ranger can come to court with you. He'll be right beside you the whole time. You won't be alone. Emma's eyes widened. She looked at Ranger, then back at Warren. The bad man will be there, she whispered, her first acknowledgement of Marcus Webb's existence since the assault. Yes, Warren said honestly, he will be, but he can't hurt you. There will be police officers and your parents will be close by and Ranger will be right next to you. And all you have to do is tell the truth about what you saw. Can you do that? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hand buried in Ranger's fur. Finally, she nodded. I can do it, she whispered. With Ranger, I can do it. Sarah Mitchell watched this exchange and felt tears prick her eyes. They'd cleared the legal hurdle, but the real test was still ahead, putting a traumatized 3-year-old on the witness stand and hoping she could find the courage to speak the truth that might send a violent man to prison. The trial was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare Emma for the most difficult moment of her young life. 3 days before a golden retriever would walk into a courtroom and change the American justice system forever. The morning of Emma's testimony arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind that made Portland feel heavy and suffocating. Inside courtroom 4A, the air conditioning hummed at maximum capacity, but it couldn't cool the tension that permeated every corner of the room. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Reporters, victim advocates, legal observers, and citizens who'd followed the case through months of media coverage. Everyone understood they were about to witness something unprecedented. Sarah Mitchell arrived 2 hours early, reviewing her questions for the 100th time. She'd spent the previous 3 days working with Emma, using dolls and drawings to practice courtroom procedures. But practice and reality were different universes, and Sarah knew that even with Ranger's support, this could go catastrophically wrong. If Emma shut down, if she couldn't speak, Marcus Webb would walk free. The burden on a 3-year-old's shoulders was almost unbearable to contemplate. At 9:47 a.m., Detective Warren brought Emma and Ranger through a private entrance, away from the crowds and cameras. Emma wore a pale blue dress that Maria had carefully selected, something comfortable, something that made her look like the child she was. Her hair was pulled back in 2 small ponytails, and she clutched Mr. Patches under one arm while her other hand gripped Ranger's leash. "Remember what we practiced," Warren said gently, kneeling to Emma's level. "Ranger will be right beside you the whole time. He won't leave you, I promise." Emma nodded, but her face was pale, her eyes enormous with fear. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, a tiny figure being asked to shoulder the weight of justice itself. Judge Coleman had arranged the courtroom with meticulous care. Emma's chair was raised slightly so she'd be visible to the jury but wasn't towering and intimidating. Beside it, a thick cushion had been placed on the floor for Ranger. The witness box had been modified. The traditional enclosed structure opened on one side so Emma wouldn't feel trapped. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, Judge Coleman entered. "All rise." The bailiff called, "The State of Oregon versus Marcus Webb. The court calls Emma Rodriguez to the stand." The courtroom doors opened, and Emma entered holding Detective Warren's hand, with Ranger walking calmly beside her. The golden retriever's presence immediately transformed the atmosphere. Several jurors leaned forward, their expressions softening. The court reporter blinked back tears. Even the bailiff, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything, felt his throat tighten. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table, his expression carefully neutral under Castellano's coaching. But his hands, clasped on the table, were white-knuckled. This was the witness he'd hoped would never materialize, the 3-year-old whose silence had been his greatest protection. Emma climbed into her chair with Warren's help, and Ranger immediately settled on the cushion, his head coming to rest perfectly positioned so Emma could see him. The girl's hand dropped instinctively to his head, fingers tangling in his golden fur. Sarah Mitchell approached slowly, her movements deliberately calm and non-threatening. "Hello, Emma. My name is Sarah. We've met before, remember?" Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes darting between Sarah and Ranger, using the dog as an anchor. "Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer as best as you can. If you need a break, you can tell me. If you need to pet Ranger, that's okay too. There's no rush, okay?" Another tiny nod. Sarah began with simple questions: Emma's name, her age, her favorite color, establishing a baseline, letting the child's voice become familiar to the jury. Emma answered in whispers, single words that the court reporter had to strain to hear. "Emma, do you remember going to Little Sunshine Daycare?" Yes, the word was barely audible. Do you remember your teacher, Miss Sarah? Emma's grip on Ranger tightened. Yes. Did you like Miss Sarah? She was nice. 3 words, slightly louder. Emma's eyes filled with tears at the memory of the teacher who'd read her stories and tied her shoes and made her laugh. Sarah pulled out a photograph, the daycare building on a sunny day, children playing in the yard. Do you recognize this place? My school, Emma whispered. Emma, I need to ask you about a day last October, a day when something bad happened at your school. Do you remember that day? The change in Emma was immediate and visceral. Her entire body went rigid. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought they'd lost her, that Emma would retreat back into that silent prison where she'd spent 6 months. But then Ranger shifted. The dog lifted his head and placed his chin directly on Emma's lap, his warm brown eyes looking up at her with infinite patience and love. Emma looked down at him, and something in that connection steadied her. Yes, she whispered, I remember. Can you tell us what happened? Emma's voice was so quiet the judge had to ask for the audio system to be adjusted. I was looking for Mr. Patches. I dropped him. I went to find him. Where did you go? The hall, the closet door was open. Emma's breathing accelerated again. I heard noises. Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice gentle. What kind of noises? Scary noises, hitting noises. Tears began streaming down Emma's face. Miss Sarah was crying. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, transfixed by the testimony of this impossibly brave child. What did you do then, Emma? I looked, her voice broke. I looked in the closet. What did you see? Emma began shaking. Ranger stood up on the cushion, pressing himself against her legs, offering his full body as support. Emma buried one hand in his fur, the other clutching Mr. Patches so tightly the teddy bear's seams looked ready to burst. Emma, Sarah said softly, you're very brave. Can you tell us what you saw in that closet? For 10 seconds that felt like 10 years, Emma said nothing. The defense attorney half rose, preparing to object that the witness was non-responsive. Judge Coleman leaned forward. The jury held their collective breath. Then Emma lifted her head. She looked across the courtroom, her gaze finding and locking onto Marcus Webb. The defendant shifted uncomfortably under the weight of that stare, a 3-year-old child looking at him with eyes that had seen too much, that carried knowledge no child should possess. Emma's hand rose slowly, trembling, pointing directly at Marcus Webb. And in the crushing silence of that courtroom, in a voice that was small but absolutely certain, she spoke the 2 words that would change everything. Bad man. The words echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Several jurors gasped. Maria Rodriguez sobbed openly in the gallery. Carlos gripped the bench in front of him, his knuckles white. Emma wasn't finished. With Ranger pressed against her, lending her his courage and strength, she continued in broken fragments that painted a devastating picture. He hurt Miss Sarah. With the big tool, hit her. She fell down, blood on the floor. He saw me. His face was mean, so mean. Marcus Webb's carefully maintained composure shattered. His face went red, then pale. He whispered urgently to Castellano, who looked equally shaken. Sarah asked a few more questions, keeping them simple, letting Emma describe what she remembered at her own pace. The testimony was fragmented, not chronological, exactly what you'd expect from a traumatized 3-year-old. But it was truthful, authentic, and utterly damning. When Castellano stood for cross-examination, Judge Coleman intervened. Mr. Castellano, I'm allowing you to question this witness, but I'm warning you now. One inappropriate question, one moment of badgering, and I'll hold you in contempt. This child has already shown remarkable courage. You will treat her with respect. Castellano, recognizing he was in an impossible position, asked only a few gentle questions, trying to suggest Emma might have been confused, might have seen something innocent that her child's mind misinterpreted. But Emma, strengthened by Ranger's unwavering presence, didn't waver. She knew what she'd seen. She knew who had hurt her beloved teacher. After 20 minutes, Castellano sat down, knowing that continuing would only make things worse. Some battles couldn't be won. "Emma," Judge Coleman said kindly, "you've been very brave today. Thank you for telling us the truth. You may step down." As Warren helped Emma from the witness stand, Ranger walking protectively beside her, the child paused and looked back at the jury. In a voice stronger than any she'd used that morning, she said, "He's bad. Don't let him hurt anyone else." Then she was gone, escorted out through the private exit, leaving behind a courtroom forever changed by 2 words from the smallest witness. "Bad man." Jury deliberated for 3 hours and 17 minutes. To Sarah Mitchell, sitting in her office unable to eat or focus on anything else, it felt like 3 years. She'd watched Emma's testimony transform the courtroom, had seen the jurors' faces as that tiny finger pointed at Marcus Webb, but she'd been a prosecutor long enough to know that emotion didn't always translate to conviction. Reasonable doubt was a powerful shield, and Castellano had tried valiantly to plant seeds of uncertainty. When her phone finally rang with the bailiff's message, "We have a verdict," Sarah's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The courtroom filled quickly, the same overflow crowd that had witnessed Emma's testimony returning for the conclusion. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez sat in the front row, holding hands so tightly their fingers had gone white. Detective Warren stood at the back with Ranger, who seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and sat perfectly still, his intelligent eyes watching the proceedings. Marcus Webb entered with his attorneys, his face a mask that couldn't quite hide the fear underneath. He'd seen what Sarah had seen, 12 jurors who'd looked at Emma Rodriguez and believed every word she'd said. Judge Coleman entered and the ritual formalities began. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Chen, who'd spent the entire trial taking meticulous notes. "Madam Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" Patricia Chen's voice was steady, clear, absolute. "In the matter of the state of Oregon versus Marcus Webb, on the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Maria collapsed against Carlos, sobbing with relief. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Victim advocates embraced each other. Marcus Webb's face crumbled as the reality of 15 years minimum in state prison crashed over him. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling 6 months of crushing pressure finally release. They'd done it. Emma's courage, Ranger's support, the legal system's willingness to evolve. It had all come together to deliver justice. But as Sarah would later reflect, the verdict was only the beginning of the real story. Emma's healing journey continued long after the trial ended. For the next 8 months, Detective Warren brought Ranger to visit 3 times a week. The sessions evolved from therapy to friendship, from treatment to joy. Emma learned to laugh again, to play, to trust that the world contained goodness as well as darkness. Her nightmares gradually decreased, from nightly terrors to once a week, then once a month, then only occasionally. When they came, Maria and Carlos knew exactly what to do. They'd sit with Emma, remind her she was safe, and show her pictures of Ranger until the fear subsided. 6 months after the trial, Emma started at a new preschool. The first day was terrifying for everyone involved, but the school principal, briefed on Emma's history, had arranged for a therapy dog program. Twice a week, certified therapy dogs visited the classroom. Emma bonded immediately with a golden retriever named Sunny, and Maria watched through tears as her daughter slowly, bravely, stepped back into the world of childhood. The Rodriguez family made a decision that surprised no one who knew their story. They adopted a golden retriever puppy when Emma turned 4. She named him Hero, and the name was perfect. Hero became Emma's constant companion, her protector, her confidant. Carlos built a doghouse in the backyard, though Hero rarely used it, preferring to sleep on a bed beside Emma's, where she could reach down and touch his fur if bad dreams came calling. Emma's speech returned fully by her 4th birthday. She remained shy around strangers and certain triggers, loud noises, enclosed spaces, the smell of industrial cleaner that reminded her of the daycare supply closet still caused anxiety. But she was healing, growing, becoming not the child she would have been without trauma, but a different child, one who'd survived darkness and found her way back to light. Detective Warren received the Oregon Law Enforcement Medal of Valor for his work on the case, though he insisted Ranger deserved the real credit. The Golden Retriever became something of a celebrity, featured in news stories across the country, his gentle face symbolizing the intersection of justice and compassion. Warren retired from active police work 2 years after Emma's trial, dedicating himself full-time to training facility dogs for courtrooms and therapeutic settings. He established the Ranger Foundation, a nonprofit that placed certified therapy dogs with prosecutors' offices and victim advocacy centers nationwide. Within 5 years, over 60 dogs were working in courtrooms across America, helping traumatized witnesses find their voices. Ranger himself worked until age 9, when Warren decided the dog had earned a peaceful retirement. They spent Ranger's final years hiking Oregon trails, visiting schools to teach children about kindness and bravery, and making occasional trips to see Emma, visits that always ended with the girl throwing her arms around her hero's neck and whispering thank you into his golden fur. When Ranger passed away peacefully at age 12, surrounded by Warren and Emma's family, the funeral drew hundreds of people. Children who'd been helped by Ranger, prosecutors who'd worked with him, jurors from Emma's trial, and countless others whose lives he'd touched. Emma, now 9 years old, spoke at the service. "Ranger saved me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "When I was lost in the dark, he found me. He showed me it was okay to be scared, but also okay to be brave. He taught me that love is stronger than fear." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I'm talking to you all today because of him. Every word I speak, every smile I share, every time I help someone else, that's Ranger's gift. He gave me my voice back, and I promise to use it to help others the way he helped me." There wasn't a dry eye in the building. Judge Patricia Coleman's decision to allow Ranger in her courtroom created a legal precedent that rippled through the justice system. Within 3 years, 23 states had passed legislation explicitly permitting facility dogs for vulnerable witnesses. The Emma's Law movement, named after Emma Rodriguez, pushed for nationwide standards protecting child witnesses and recognizing animal-assisted support as a legitimate accommodation. Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell became a national advocate for victim-centered justice reforms. She published a book, The Girl Who Pointed: How One Child and One Dog Changed the Justice System, that became required reading in law schools across the country. She lectured about balancing defendants' rights with victims' needs, about evolving legal traditions to meet modern understanding of trauma, about courage taking many forms. Marcus Webb served his full sentence. In year 7, he granted an interview where he finally admitted his guilt, expressing remorse for Sarah Chen's injuries and acknowledging the lasting harm he'd caused Emma Rodriguez. It didn't change his sentence, but it gave his victims a small measure of closure. Sarah Chen never fully recovered physically or cognitively from her injuries. She lived in an assisted care facility, her teaching career ended, her independence stolen. But when she learned about Emma's testimony, about how Ranger had helped the little girl find her voice, Sarah wept with gratitude. "She was so brave," Sarah told her sister. "That tiny, beautiful girl was so brave." On Emma's 10th birthday, Detective Warren brought her a gift, a puppy from Ranger's last litter before his retirement. The female golden retriever had her father's gentle eyes and intuitive spirit. "What will you name her?" Warren asked. Emma didn't hesitate. "Justice," she said firmly, "because that's what Ranger gave me, justice and healing and hope." She looked up at Warren, this girl who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd found her voice in the darkest moment and used it to change the world. When I grow up, I want to train therapy dogs like you do. I want to help other kids who are scared and lost. I want to give them what Ranger gave me. Warren's eyes filled with tears. He'd be so proud of you, Emma. I'm so proud of you. That evening, as Emma played in the backyard with Hero and Justice, Maria and Carlos watched from the porch. Their daughter was laughing, running, living, a miracle they'd once thought impossible. She's going to be okay, Carlos said quietly. Maria nodded. More than okay. She's going to help other children be okay too. That's Ranger's real legacy, not just saving one child, but inspiring that child to save others. Across Portland, across Oregon, across America, other children with shattered voices were meeting their own Rangers, their own heroes with golden fur and understanding eyes. Courtrooms were changing. The justice system was evolving. And at the heart of it all was a 3-year-old girl who'd pointed at evil and named it, who'd found courage in the presence of unconditional love, who discovered that even the smallest voice, when supported and believed and given a chance to speak, could change everything. Emma Rodriguez was no longer the girl who stopped speaking. She was the girl who found her voice. And in finding it, she'd amplified the voices of countless others, creating echoes of hope that would resonate through the halls of justice for generations to come. The bad man was behind bars. The good dog had shown the way. And a little girl who'd once been lost in silence had become a beacon of light, proving that healing is possible, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful testimonies are delivered in the gentlest whispers, accompanied by the steady presence of a friend who asks for nothing but offers everything. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a child had been saved, and in the end, that was the greatest verdict of all.